So I am here at the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. I was going to open with reading a poem, which was the first thing that came up in ProjectMuse about passing Springfield on Interstate 91, but I'll spare you that as I was guilty of far enough bad poetry as an English undergraduate major. I did find 3 sources that I'm really excited about. Unfortunately, all of them had the lock logo, so I didn't think I was going to be able to access them. But as it turns out, they were all available in the Jerry Falwell Library, which continues to exceed my expectations. First up was Robert Surbrug's Beyond Vietnam, The Politics of Protest in Massachusetts, 1974 to 1990. He set out to disprove the notion that 1960s activism burned brightly and then died out in the sober, quote, gravitational pull of the 1970s, close quote, and the emergence of new conservatism. He wanted to challenge that narrative of Vietnam, splintering the left into fragments of identity politics. He gave a great historical overview of the activism in the 60s with the racial civil rights movements of the 1950s as the key igniting spark. He considered the post-Vietnam movements such as No Nukes, Central American Solidarity, the fight against apartheid, including divestment, environmentalism, AIDS activism, as well as the governorship and then presidential campaign of Michael Dukakis. His method was to review the activism that occurred on the left between 1974 to 1990 in the relatively ideologically centrist state of Massachusetts that serves as such an accurate reflection of the nation as a whole. It includes chapters on the fight against a nuclear plant proposed up in Montague near Greenfield, Mass., right in the heart of the greater Springfield metropolitan area, as well as a similar fight in New Hampshire, and Central American activities. Included are many of the usual secondary sources from activists against the 1960s, including one of my favorite books, Albert J. Matuso's The Unraveling of America. Also leveraged are special collections from nearby UMass Amherst, Springfield Greenfield newspaper accounts, union fact sheets, Massburg flyers, interviews with activists, documentary footage, journals, just a lot of resources. He concludes that left activism actually bloomed and continued to bloom, but was growing globally through the grassroots up, culminating in the successful protests against capitalism in the World Trade Organization in Seattle. But these successes were displaced by 9/11. Lana Barber wrote Latino City, Immigration and Urban Crisis in Lawrence, Massachusetts, 1945 to 2000. Very similar to Springfield, 2 hours northeast, in fact. And she intertwined this with the issue of race. Latinos had the great misfortune of arriving at about the time of the decline of the city of Lawrence and were oftentimes blamed for it. The methodology is to approach the city from an economic review of the city's history and circumstances, but then to apply or perhaps superimpose the issue of race and identity as understood as exploitation, marginalization, and discrimination. Included is a consideration of this greater conservatism, reflecting a shift from New Deal, Great Society, model cities to a rejection of urban problems as a shared responsibility. Chapters go through the different economics and the riot of 1984, which I'd never even heard of, and concludes with Latino urbanism and a geography of opportunity. Makes the case that Latinos struggled from domestic containment policy and marginalization and had to push back against the barriers of race and class in order to create their own space. Used a lot of newspaper articles from local papers, the works from the Andover Historical Society archives, state and federal agency records, as well as some of those classic works like Crabgrass Frontier and the Origins of the Urban Crisis. Finally, I found Rob Rain's book on James Naismith, who created the game of basketball right down the street from my office. It's a biography featuring an introduction by his granddaughter, Helen Naismith Carpenter, who made available 300 pages of material. It includes a foreword by Roy Williams. It is a biography. Unfortunately, it's not particularly well cited. He's a sports writer, not a historian, so there is no bibliography, no footnotes or citations. It's a biography and tells the story of James Naismith. So, thank you.